the question to go back to is Stan Gerson putting out a text saying, what's happening to our children?
Well, I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, that's what I'd like you. Please respond to that.
You have to understand, whether you're growing up in the inner paramilitary unit, that's like the inner clergy of the group. You know, I hate calling them a clergy. It wasn't a religious experience for me. Okay. Or whether you're growing up as a well taken care of, wealthy person, kid that's an adherent, the indoctrination is the same. At 4 years old, you start doing these non-reactionary drills where you learn to. When I was a kid, they changed it and made it easier. But when I was a kid, if you blink, you weren't allowed to blink staring at someone for 2 hours.
Right. That's very the hard way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very. It was very painful. So you were already learning to deny the body, and then you would do drills where people would antagonize you all the time, and you had to not react. And you're being told that you're doing these drills so that when something bad happens in life, you keep your cool. The problem with those drills, and again, you're receiving these drills in the inner Navy and the poverty like me, or if you're Johnny outside, or Elizabeth Gale, who came from a wealthy family outside. You're doing these drills at 4 or 5 years old. The problem with those drills where you're practicing not reacting is it doesn't just cut off your non-reaction when someone's trying to rattle you with something bad. Anything that rattles you, you're being groomed and taught to have a non-reaction, stoic, no emotional reaction. You cut off you don't listen to your nervous system, like seeing a child in pain or being abused or neglected. You're being groomed to not listen to your nervous system and practice not being rattled. So it doesn't just cut off your ability to not be rattled when something negative is happening to you, like an attack, but it cuts off your ability to be rattled when you see the harm of a child. It systematically cuts off your empathy. The other thing that you have to think about is when you're doing the counseling, many of the times you want to leave, but you're not allowed to leave any sort of machine counseling where they use the machine to kind of guide them to get to your old thoughts, to relive them, like Freud's abreaction therapy, or in certain ways it's similar to EMDR, which is evidence-backed. So there's something to it. But what's different here is if you want to stop, you can't stop until this needle floats. So when you go through these sessions, you're going through long periods where you don't want to be there before you get this needle that says it's okay to leave, that you're feeling good. You get a dopamine hit. It's another form of conditioning you to deny the body. And then also one of the first things, and this I'll end here and you can give me your reaction. The two first things you do, the first two things you do on the bottom of this ladder that takes you back to being a god again are what's called the non-reactionary drills. I'm changing that, where you practice non-reaction with people trying to rattle you. This is a crude example.
Sure.
Okay. That's what the first thing you do is that exercise, which is systematically removing your empathy. The next thing you do is a series of processes called the objectives. Now, these objectives are you in a room with a counselor moving your body around, basically controlling you for hours on end. And they want you to do dozens, if not hundreds of hours of these before you officially start this ladder to spiritual attainment or the godlike state. So you do this thing called the non-reactionary drills, and then this thing where you basically practice being controlled for dozens, likely hundreds, often hundreds of hours, 100 hours. And what they're telling you is that by practicing being controlled and getting what they would call flat, being okay with being controlled, then you will then be able to go out and control others better. If you're willing to be controlled and you don't have a problem with control, then you can also exert better control. So they're telling you that they're giving you an ability. They're also telling you that by doing these first two things that you do, the non-reaction drills and then the objective processes, which is basically you just being controlled for dozens of hours at least, that you're also going to have an ability to have some distance from your your reactionary mind. You'll be able to see it better because it'll be away from you, not so right in you like a limb, but like over there. You'll be able to have a better perspective on your reactionary mind. This is my interpretation, that's what they're telling you you're doing. But what they're really doing is grooming you and getting you accustomed over dozens, if not 100 hours, to be getting used to being controlled. So the first two things you do systematically cut off your empathy and acclimate you to being controlled.
Yes.
Right. And so when you do that to a child mind, you know, I probably started doing those things at 4 years old, 5 years old, maybe 7 years old. I think, you know, under the guise of a religious experience, I think you're setting up a mechanism where your economic class really doesn't matter. You're in a situation where when you feel your nervous system telling you no, you ignore it.
Yeah.
And then people around you are able to get you to do things like tolerate a second-hand relationship with your parents. Well, you've been acclimated to be controlled. You know, put through these draconian, coercive, brutal forms of punishment where you're made a second-class citizen when you mess up. Nobody would do these things where you're kind of constantly made to think you're less and wrong. A normal person wouldn't do these things. But because you've practiced being controlled, you've been groomed to be controlled, your empathy's been cut off from a young age, you just do what you're told, even though it doesn't feel right, because you've been groomed to do so. And you don't have empathy for others when you see that happening to them. Yeah. I don't think what Alexander and Johnny have in common is they both would have been put through these things at a very young age. Right. And if they weren't put through both of those processes, which are the first things you do in Hubbard's movement to move you up, I don't believe they would be in a mental space where either of those things would have happened. Where, right. I think that those that training, one being a middle class kid or maybe even an upper middle class kid, in Johnny's case, and then one being an inner Navy kid, a paramilitary kid in the inner corps that run the whole thing. That is an experience that it sets you up for you to not be for you to make catastrophic choices or not be able to maneuver in life well when faced with certain circumstances. That's what